This station is now the ultimate power in the universe.
This table is really tilted.
Excuse me? Am I gonna get a chance to speak?
Maybe I should take that back.
Denied. Damn, son, where'd you find this?
Take a giant step for mankind.
Welcome to the Tilted Table, with your hosts, Sean and Joe.
Folks, welcome to another episode of The Tilted Table, the internet's answer to a question that no one asked. I am no longer Sean Landon Clarke. I am Sean Kabibi.
Oh, it finally happened.
Names dropped.
Oh, finally, and I am excited about this one.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
This is Joey Joe the Fracky Mac.
Today, Joe has decided he is going to interview me about my book, my debut novel, and I'm ready for some questions. I don't know what kind of background. This is really kind of off the cuff. So, the book is called Pressed. Again, written under my real name, Sean R. Kabibi. I'm not going to tell you what the R means. I don't know if it matters.
That was going to be one of my questions too.
Okay, well, we'll save it for the questions.
Well, so one of the things I was really excited about is that you've actually ditched your nom de plume.
Yeah.
And you're officially going by who I know you as.
Yes.
So I thought one of the cool things is the fact that you are an award-winning journalist.
Yes, it's true.
Educator, writer of many novels, short fictions. This is probably your 37th book?
No, this is definitely not my 30th. This is my first book. Now, I have written other books that I have that could be published. Granted, I could find someone to publish them. I have two other books that are written. I have another book that I started. It's maybe 15 chapters in. I don't know what that equates in terms of length because I'm not 100% sure how that ultimately is going to pan out. Yeah, so I have 3 books ready to go. 1 book that's being worked on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I thought is a nifty little side note about this particular book, Pressed, is how it came about, and you surprise on the DL getting your PhD from USC. So walk me through that one.
Okay, so I wrote this book. I started writing this book a long time ago, and I had a basic idea. I always wanted to write a book. So this is the first thing I ever attempted to write at length. Now, again, I was a journalist for a long time. I've written long stories. I've written some short stories, but I had never written a book, and I always wanted to. And so I came up with this idea. And the basic idea is, when I was a journalist for the Oakland Tribune, what I experienced was the dawn of the internet. And I'm not the dawn of the internet like it's starting. Like, it was starting to get big. So this is 1999, 2000,
Right. This is like the segue from modems to T1 lines.
Yeah. So we're getting into the fact that news was being delivered, not only by major news sites online. Now people were developing their own websites and becoming their own news organizations. I don't know if you're familiar with the Daily Beast.
No.
Okay,
I mean, I've heard of it. I wouldn't say I'm familiar with it.
Okay, so the Daily Beast is an online, very reputable online news outlet, but it started out with a bunch of dudes sitting in a room and said, we're going to create our own, online newspaper. So as this was happening, the industry, as we know it, newspapers, was starting to die. Mm-hmm. And I was working in the middle of all of that, and I experienced a bunch of things. And what I experienced at the time, I didn't really realize it, but what I was experiencing was like being on the Titanic, and we had just struck the iceberg. So
and there were still lifeboats?
And there's lifeboats.
Okay.
And there's a lot of people that don't think the ship is sinking, right? And so you're in that environment, and over time, over years, as things, progressed, there was a lot of things that were going on that was just, crappy, towards certain employees. And I experienced some things. I witnessed a lot of things. But what I was witnessing as a whole was an industry starting to die, and what people were doing in that panic. Some older folk that were claiming that newspapers are, part of America. It's Americana. They'll never go away. Younger generation that was like, shit, I think I'm in the wrong field of work. I gotta get out of here.
It's time to pull my ripcord.
Yeah, I gotta pull the ripcord and get out. So I always thought of this idea of writing a story about a kind of a young idealistic journalist, graduates college, goes into the industry around this time.
Is this your autobiography?
We'll get to that in a sec, because I'm always asked this question. And so I'm like, I'm going to use that experience, what I saw, to draw up this story about an individual going in and kind of learning what media is really about, going in with an idealistic kind of view, but learning along the way what the industry is really about, which is basically no different than any other business. It's about making money. And when an industry starts to fail, it becomes way more apparent what they're willing to do to make money or to keep themselves alive. Because, journalism has always been kind of the voice of the voiceless, that kind of idea that, this is not your typical business. We're not Walmart. We're not trying to make a profit. But what you find out is, no, it's always been that way.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Advertising revenue is king.
So I decided to craft this story, and it's not an autobiography. It's not even remotely close to experiences I had. If you read the book, you'll find out that, well, this is a crazy book. Like, this obviously would not happen to an individual. But it is loosely based on things I saw happen to people. So the things that happened to the main character did happen to me. Some of them did. But the other things that happened were things I saw happen to other people. And I just put it all together and put it onto one guy going through this fucking, ringer. I don't know. Do you want me to tell you what it's about? Or?
Yeah, no, I definitely want to touch on that, but I also want to hear the story. This was birthed out of your educational experience at USC.
Yeah, you start interviewing me, I'll go on tangents. So I wrote the book, and I did shoot it out to a couple of agents, publishers. Didn't get any kind of reaction to it. I found out later kind of why. I'm not going to get into that. So when I decided to go get my PhD, I got my PhD because I actually found a program where you can get a PhD in creative writing and literature. And it's at USC, and I convinced my employer to flip most of the bill for this. And again, that's a whole nother story of why would they do that. So I applied. I actually didn't expect to get in. I got in, and of course I'm going through these classes and doing all this stuff. And you have to write a dissertation, which is a novel, right? And I'm like, wow, I've got one written. Was it completely done? Pretty much. But again, I've never really written a book, so there was a lot of stuff that could be reworked and redone. So I basically took what I had, and I started working on it as my dissertation, worked with some faculty members, one in particular, and put the book together. Part of it is you have to get it published. That's part of the deal. Your dissertation.
And are you the one that goes to find the publisher, or do they help with the publishing?
But see, that's the thing. Initially it was me, so I'm shipping it out, and I'm just getting rejection letters left and right off of this thing, and eventually my advisors and the team at USC, and I know they work with a bunch of independent publishers, got someone to publish it.
Got it. And so do you have to write and I want to jump into the actual high level of the story, but when you're sending things to a publisher, do you have a cover letter? Do you just start dialing for dollars on the phone? How does that even work?
Yeah, you write a query letter, and you basically talk about what, and it's supposed to be kind of as short as it can possibly be.
A sentence?
No, not that short. But you don't want to write 15 pages describing your book, right? You want to make sure that's about, your query letter should be no longer than a page, which introduces the book, what it's about, and maybe a little bit of background about who you are. Specifically, if you're writing nonfiction, you want to say, well, I am an expert in this field, and this is what qualifies me to write about this. So yeah, I did a bunch of query letters. I talked to a bunch of agents, and the response I got from agents was the same question you would get in any kind of art. So it doesn't matter whether it's music, whether it's acting, or you're putting a movie together or something like that. The first question they ask is, well, who's this for? Who's the audience? And that's the biggest roadblock that I ran into, was it doesn't have a specific audience in mind. So when you think about publishing, there's something called genre fiction. Now that's what publishers and agents want to see. They want to see genre fiction. And what that means is like romance, fantasy, thriller, the young adult, things like that.
Basically walk into Barnes and Nobles and look at the signs.
Yeah, because those have built-in audiences. Now, if you don't write something that fits into that mold, they label it as literary fiction. And a good example of literary fiction would be something like Fight Club. That's literary fiction. So if you've ever seen the movie and the book are really close. So if you've seen the movie, I'm not going to say you've read the book, but you know what it's about. And if you ask somebody well, who's that for? It would be hard to pinpoint. It doesn't fit in any specific genre. It's not romance. It's not young adult. It's just a story that this guy manufactured. So my story is similar to that, is that it's just a story that I manufactured. One of the bigger problems agents had beyond the fact that it didn't have a built-in audience, which doesn't mean you're not going to get published. There's tons of literary fiction that's published. Most books that are considered classics are literary fiction, right? They don't necessarily fit in a genre. Genre is considered like, if I compared it to music, genre fiction would be like boy bands, In Sync, right? Literary fiction would be your Rush, or your progressive metal bands or something.
That's a really good way of putting it.
Yeah. So, but beyond the problem that I didn't really have a built-in audience, as my advisor put it, she thought it was bipolar. That it starts out seeming very serious, kind of heavy duty kind of subject matter with, this guy that goes into journalism. He's all idealistic, and he learns the hard way that this is a very, very shady business. It's all about money. It's always been about money. But now we're also in a business that's, sinking like the Titanic, which makes people even more shady.
Vicious.
And so it's got that kind of serious tone to it. The second half turns into kind of a comedy. And so it was she thought it was very bipolar. Like you've got this sort of serious thing that eventually turns into this sort of almost borderline absurd comedy.
And did you design it that way?
Kinda, because I had the idea in my head. The basic idea I had for it was this, that like everyone knows somebody that left a job on bad terms, whether they quit or they got fired. And that's that popular saying is like, you know what? I wish I would have told my boss this, or I wish I would have done this before I left. My book is about a guy who finally gets fed up with an industry and decides all those things that you would have done, he does them. So it starts to get into a very absurdist kind of comedy. It's not super absurd, but it's some of the things this guy does are just like, obviously, I'm not going to say impossible, but yeah, it would be considered, pretty much an absurd level of comedy. So it's bipolar in that way.
And as part of your dissertation, this is the dissertation.
This is the dissertation.
All right.
Yeah. So my novel is my dissertation.
And when I know I'm gonna bring this up again towards the end of the episode, but when does it come out, and where can all of your legions of intergalactic fans find this?
So when it comes out on June 16th, it'll be available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Target, Walmart. Most of any kind of book retailer will have it. You can order it, online.
Like B. Dalton.
It should be. Okay. If I told you specifically, it would be. I'm not sure. I was also told by my publisher that it may not be instantly ready in all those outlets. So it's going to take a couple of weeks for things to, I guess, however it clicks together, that, you would see it on a Barnes and Noble, or you would see it on, say, a B. Dalton or something like that.
How did you come up with the title Pressed?
Well, so this is an interesting story just because I've had about 5 names for this damn book. And what I came up, first of all, I wanted to come up with a name initially that related to journalism. So I started thinking of all these journalistic terms, and I'm just I can call it this or that. And none of these names seemed to stick. And then I decided, I figured out the name. I wanted to call it Below the Fold. That was the original title, was Below the Fold, when I said I'm settling on Below the Fold. And what that means is that in the newspaper world, if you have a really good story, like a headlining, a big story, it's above the fold of the paper. So when you see it like in a news rack, it would have the headline and your byline.
We're really dating ourselves right here.
Right now. Mm-hmm. Below the fold would be anything that's on the bottom half that wouldn't be seen. So obviously you want to be above the fold. That's when you've written the best stories. So I went with Below the Fold. I thought it was cool. Because again, this guy is subversive at some point. He starts going against his bosses and the industry to try to prove a point or make some kind of statement. And so I went with that for a while. But what happened was, as I got closer to thinking about, getting it published, I also learned that the internet is a great search engine. And ideally, I would want a title that doesn't exist anywhere. I looked up Below the Fold, and it was like 2 or 3 books called Below the Fold.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Way more known than me. And so I'm like, well, let me try to come up with a title that absolutely doesn't exist. The press, obviously the press, the media, and being pressed, the pressure, what this guy's under. I'm like, oh, perfect.
And there was no other books with this name.
Okay, so I looked it up. I didn't find it, but within the last year, I did look it up again, and there is a book called Pressed. It's not a well-known book, but there's at least one that does exist. And at that point, I was like, I'm satisfied. I'm good enough.
Yeah. Was that more like a culinary book as far as like how to use your juicer?
It should be. I don't know if it is though. I don't even think I really looked at what it was.
Cuisinart for you.
So yeah, Pressed. I thought was perfect for the book. Yeah, I totally went with it, and hopefully no other Pressed come out before June 16th.
So one of the things so I'm super proud of you, man. That you're the only friend I have that's ever actually written a book. Well, let me rephrase that. Certainly, I have some friends that have written short stories. No one's written a book and then been published and then been distributed. So I'm thrilled that you've got this opportunity. And I'm really interested in this. So walk me through, like, when you actually have a publisher that's going to put this together, like, what's that process in your back and forth dialogue with the publisher like? Do you have to edit again?
Well, okay, so I can't say I know this 100% because, again, I'm not super familiar with this process. I'm just learning it as I go along. But if I'm Stephen King, I have a team. I have tons of people working with me. In this particular case, USC, I think, pushed this publisher to do it. So and without saying anything bad about the publisher, and there's some other issues, and I don't want to get into a whole long back and forth that we've had, but the process has been pretty much like submit it. They went through it and supposedly edited it. They didn't do a whole lot to it, not that I can tell. I've gone through it and I don't see any major changes. They did one or two things change, but they're really minor, and that was about it. So there was kind of light on the editing, and I think their attitude is it went through USC, so they pretty much, I think, are figuring that it's well written enough that there's not going to be anything majorly wrong with it. So I think they just scanned it to make sure of that.
Got it. Okay.
And so as far as things like the cover, the outside of the book, that kind of stuff. That was a back and forth because originally they gave me cover ideas that I hated, and you saw some of the yeah. And I was
so
just
did you have a vision for the cover?
I did tell them that I wanted something to do with like a newspaper on fire, right? And so they sent me things like that, but it was mostly AI generated kind of stuff.
Did it look like clip art?
It wasn't that bad, but it just didn't look right. And so I started hounding them about like, well, you guys you have access to real photography? Like, can we get like a real picture? And I had a back and forth with them. The picture that's on the cover is the picture that I actually found. And so I sent it to them, and they're like, oh, okay, yeah, we can go with this. But you can see that they're kind of hands off. This is mostly being done because the school has asked them to do it, or it's part of my dissertation, and getting me published is what it was required to do. So they've definitely been a lot more hands off, I think, than if they were really interested in the book. That's why I kind of make fun of the fact, like, oh, you got published. And I'm like, well, my publisher, he hasn't really said too much to me about, like, wanting to push it a whole lot. So that's mostly on me. Like, they're expecting me, I think, to do something.
So for the marketing piece, you've got to do all of your own marketing website. Yeah.
I actually do have a website that they put together. And I went through it and I made some suggestions. It's not up and running, hasn't been launched yet. I don't know when that's going to happen. I actually haven't even talked to them about that. But yeah, I've definitely done a lot of the heavy lifting, and what you're holding is a proof copy. And there's some mistakes and there's some obvious mistakes in formatting. I'm like, what? And so I sent it back. I said, do correct these things. Like, oh, okay. Right. So
is that process pretty easy?
Yeah, it wasn't too hard. Yeah.
You just basically send an email and like bullet point what your changes are.
Yeah. Right. So it hasn't been too difficult.
So what are you most proud about with this book?
I think that I wrote it.
Well, okay. Aside from the obvious part,
I think it's a good story. That's funny because I was talking with Love about this, and she's like, you don't really hype up your own book, and I'm like, I like the book. I think it's a good book. But if I'm going to sit here and try to, I'm not a person, I've never been good at selling you a bill of goods, You're
not the ice to Eskimos guy.
Yeah. So I'm not going to sit there and, tell you like you should buy it, it's great, whatever. It's a good book. And I'm pretty tough critic on myself. So I think in the scale of 1 to 10, it's about a 6.5 to 7.
Okay. I
think it's good. But I think I have a hard time trying to sell it as something that's like a magnificent piece of literature. It's a really good story. It's well written, I think. I definitely, one of my strengths, and my advisors even told me this, is my character dialogue, which I'm really proud of. Yeah, if you're asking me about what I'm proud of, is the character dialogue. My characters actually sound like real people talking. 100%.
Okay.
Yeah, 100%. I'll live and die on that hill.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?
Leave a like on the video. I know you're enjoying this. Can you shut up?
The internet's answer to a question that was never asked. The Tilted Table with Sean and Joe.
And is it weird? And so this is like a twofold question. Was it weird to ditch your pen name after all of your other projects?
Yeah, I wrote a bunch of articles under a pen name. So what happened with me was that as a journalist, I wrote under Sean Kabibi. That's my name. And I did that, I quit journalism like in 2005. And, when I got into teaching, it wasn't writing really, just was, working, doing my job. And I started getting, the itch, like I wanted to write a book. I'm thinking I should get back into writing. And I realized at this point I'd been working in the public education sphere for about 10 years, and I am the only Sean Kabibi on this planet. It is not fucking hard to find me. So when I was thinking about this book and I'm finishing it, I had all the intention of writing under my real name. What stopped me was I realized that if I wrote something, I would be easy to find if someone liked it or didn't like it, or, just people could be weird. At the same time, I was starting to write articles again as a freelance writer. Mm-hmm. So I was getting contacted by news outlets to write a lot of political stuff. And this was, during the Biden-Donald Trump election, the first one. And, they would want me to write something that was leaning right-wing. And, okay, cool, I'd do that. And then they want me to write something that's leaning left-wing, depending on the outlet. And I didn't want to use my real name because, politics is really polarizing. So I picked a name, Sean Landon Clarke, and mainly because it was nondescript in terms of like didn't sound too ethnic. Mm-hmm. And that's another issue. I've actually had issues with my publisher when I changed my name back to my original name. They're like, your name, it doesn't sound like an author's name. It sounds too ethnic or whatever. And it's like, well, I want to use my real name now. So I was writing under a pen name just because I didn't want to deal with anybody getting upset over an article I wrote.
Right.
So I started writing all these articles. I started a blog, and I have all these articles.
Do you want to touch on Medium?
Yeah. So I have all my stuff is like stored on Medium, and most of those have been published somewhere else.
Well, and for all of your fans, I think touch on what Medium is, because I'd never heard of it until I jumped on there.
Oh, okay. So Medium is basically YouTube for writers. So you can
that's
start.
A good way of putting it.
You can start an account and you can post any story you want, anything at all. Like there's no gatekeepers. Okay. So, but what I was doing was I would write an article for somebody, or I would try to sell an article to somebody. And once they ran with it, I'd take it and I would put it up on Medium, my blogs. I had a collection of all my stories. And that's the reason I chose the pen name, was because, again, some of the stuff I'd written, it just, there's politics involved. And I didn't want to get hounded by anybody. So as I went on to write this book, I just stuck with the name because I'd already started an account with Medium. I had followers. But when I was talking with Love, she told me, she said, when you publish your book, and this is literally like maybe a month ago, I want a signed copy. And she goes, but I want you to sign your real name. And I'm like, well, you can't sign your real name on a book that that has a different name on it. And then she says, well, why don't you just use your real name? Like, don't you want credit for this? And I'm like, I don't know. I was just like, that time, I think at that time I was starting to get to a point where I haven't really ever been hounded about anything. And I started thinking, well, maybe I do want credit, and I said, you know what? Fuck it. I'm going to use my real name, and the same with this podcast. It was the same thing.
Right.
It's the reason why your real last name isn't the Fracky Mac, right? So I'm just like, you know what? I really don't care. And I want everything to coalesce. So I want everything to be coordinated. So if I'm Sean Kabibi and I publish a book under my real name, then obviously for my podcast, I'm going to go back and I'm going to use my real name.
Well, I'm excited. Yeah. It finally happened.
Yeah. So the big reveal.
Was it kind of nervous to say it out loud?
No, not at all.
I say you're after 43 episodes of being Sean Landon Clarke.
Yeah, but it's not that hard to do. It's my real name. I use it all the time, just only in these spaces.
But it's weird to ditch your stage name.
Yeah. Well, you know what's interesting? I'll give you something about my my pen name. It's funny. So I teach high school seniors, and I teach dual enrollment, which is college classes with high school seniors. And, we do English 1A, which is rhetoric and writing. So you have to read, expository text and, analyze it, talk about it, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Basic English class.
Right.
So considering, these kids have to analyze, well, what's the point that this person's making? What kind of arguments are they sounding? That typical stuff. My first assignment is more of a test to see where kids are at. I would use one of Sean Landon Clarke's articles. And of course, I'm not telling him it's me, right? So we would read this and like, well, this is what I think he's talking about. And he's making this argument and it's good or bad. And I'm sitting there going, not really.
Do you just chuckle to yourself as this is happening?
I still to this day have never told a class after it was all said and done, like, by the way, that's me, right? So I was waiting for someone to really challenge it and just piss me off. And like, you think that's what he's talking about? Yeah, that's not what he's talking about. I know that's not what he's talking about because that's me. I wrote that. I know exactly what I'm talking about.
Well, one of my favorite articles for everybody out there that you can check up on Sean Landon Clarke's Medium is the article's title is "Think Globally and Act Locally to Fight Climate Change. Get a Pool."
Get a pool. Yeah, that's a classic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to put together, and it'll be my next book. It's a collection of essays I've written, and that's going to be in there. That's going to be included. Most of my stuff on Medium, I mean, there's some serious articles, again, because I would publish things, and then I would use them after they would make their run in the media. But that's not really what I wanted to write. I wanted to write more kind of satirical, humorous type stuff. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the stuff on there is humorous. Some of it's kind of absurd. I think the one you're referring to is, I think, a little more on the absurd side.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
I actually laughed out loud multiple times while I was reading that one.
A lot of it is quasi-observational. Like one of my favorite articles I wrote was the pizza delivery men from the 80s are the true heroes. And it's just, if you're old enough to remember, if you get a pizza, if it's delivered after 30 minutes, you got it for free, right? It had to be there in 30 minutes or less. But this was during a time when there was no internet, there was no GPS, and people would go out of their way.
A map book.
Yeah.
That was even before MapQuest or Google Maps or Apple or any. Yeah,
there's no internet. They would actually have a map of on the wall of the pizza shop with the radius circle. And, if it was on whatever First Street, you'd have to go, there's First Street, and you'd have to sort of memorize where it's at and go there, or know the neighborhoods well enough that you could figure it out.
Three lefts, 2 rights, go straight and hang a right.
Right. And when I was a kid and we would order pizza, part of the move was to try to make it as difficult as possible for the person to find it. And that could be everything from like turning off your lights so that they can't see the address, or pushing out your trash cans in front of the address on the curb so they couldn't see that. Dude. Just anything to delay them. And there was one time that I was probably in the 8th or 9th grade, and my parents were out of town, so I had a bunch of friends over, and we're going to order a bunch of pizza, and we think that we can get this stuff for free. And one of the moves that my friend made was he walked down the street, and where the street signs are, right? Mm-hmm. He threw a blanket over the street sign, knowing that the person that comes down the street is not going to be able to see the sign or miss it. It's dark outside. You're just going to do a dark blanket over, you would just miss it.
Wow. So, just when I thought I'd heard it all.
Right. Just anything to slow them down. It's one of my more favorite pieces because it's not an absurd piece that, it's not crazy or weird.
Like the O.J. Simpson.
Yeah. The O.J. Simpson. That's a pretty dark one. So yeah, those types I think are my favorite, satirist, humorous style. And I started writing mostly those kinds of things, although that's when I stopped being able to publish because people didn't really want any of this shit. Mm-hmm. They want something of, politics and, again, audience, that stuff sells, you know. So I decided to take all of those stories. They're still up. You can read them. I'm going to pull them down. And I'm collecting them into a book I'm going to publish. But I don't think I'm going to. My publisher, I already talked to my publisher about that. I got a flat out no, real quick. Can
you self-publish?
Yeah, I can self-publish. And likely what I'm going to do, I'm not going to spend a bunch of time trying to get someone to publish it. I think one of the things about the publishing industry that I think a lot of people believe to be true, and it is true, is that books don't sell as much as they used to. Mm-hmm. Again, the internet and everything else, books I think are kind of more of old school style. But what also they don't know is it's way cheaper to publish things now.
Really?
Way, way cheaper. I mean, I can publish your book for free.
Seriously?
Well, I wouldn't do it. It's a lot of work. But as far as like the kind of money you would have to put into it,
right? I
could have your book designed, ready to go, on a shelf, absolutely free.
That is bananas. I've never heard that.
Yeah. You don't make any money until the book sells. You sell a copy, you get a cut, and that's it. There's no upfront costs. It's super cheap now.
Yeah.
It's just a technology. When people are self-publishing, they're doing print on demand. Mm-hmm. So the book exists in theory, and it doesn't get made until someone orders it, and they can print these books out in a matter of maybe 2 or 3 days. They can pump out as many books as you need.
That's wild.
Where the old days was you would actually have to, buy like 5,000 copies of your own book, and then you would have to hawk them.
Sure.
Yeah.
Out of the back of your Honda Civic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things I'm curious, since you're basically have to self-market this thing, and it doesn't sound like they're really giving you lots of assistance and, pushing it out into the world. How do you go about that?
I don't know. My first thought is I don't. I don't want to sound like I'm not going to do anything with it,
You're
but I got a day job.
7 copies.
Well, I mean, I already have a good idea of how many I can sell just based on the number of people that want to buy a copy of my book. And that's without people even knowing that I wrote a book. Again, I was operating under Landon Clarke. I told almost none of my friends, but now that it is under my name, I am going to go on my own personal social media when the book is released and say, hey, you should buy a copy of my book. I'm sure I'll sell, a few copies. Out the gate, just under my pen name, without using any of my friends, I probably already had about 50 people that.
Oh, good for you, man.
That wanted.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Now I'll buy a copy. Can you sign it? Now these are people that I do know. I know them face to face, but they're not necessarily, friends on my Facebook and things like that. Once I put it on my Facebook, on my personal Facebook, I'm sure I'll have at least another 200 probably that'll go out and buy it.
That's exciting.
So what am I up to? 250 copies?
Yeah. Hey, it's better than one.
Yeah. I think one thing that I want to get out there is that I didn't write this to try to make a career out of it. I'm not trying to make a bunch of money off of it. I make very little money off of the sales of these books. My goal was to publish a book, and that's it. That's the satisfying part for me. If I really want to sell books, I would have to write more like genre fiction, which the one I'm currently working on is straight up genre fiction. And it's funny how my publisher who's published this book seems not too interested in this, but my other book, when I pitched what it was, they're immediately like, well, we're interested in that. So the book that you actually published, but the one that doesn't exist yet, you're like, well, when is that going to be done? We're all about that one.
Have they been stalking you on a completion date?
No, not really. No, actually, I shouldn't say that. They asked me that. I said maybe a year, and there was at least a couple conversations where they've asked me about like, what do you think you can get that done? Like what, 6 months, a year? What are you thinking about? And so, but they haven't actually said anything like that to me about like, yeah, we want you to get it done. I haven't been offered any kind of like contract. They haven't even asked for any samples. I've written about 15 chapters of that. So I know they're interested. I think a lot of it's going to have to do with me saying like, hey, I got some sample chapters. Hey, when you want it, they'll be all about it. I think they want to check it out for sure.
So what's the most satisfying part about writing a book like this? Other than character dialogue?
Well,
that's what you're most proud of, but what is the satisfaction of it?
I think, I don't know how many people have gone through this. When you do any piece of art, the actual end, what it looks like, is it's not real clear. And so things change as you go along. You're putting things together, you're changing, you're adding things, oh, wait a second, I want to do this or that. And I did that a bunch of times with this because even my story, it wasn't outlined all that well. And I started running into problems where like, well, why would this character do this? This doesn't make any sense. So I had to figure out how to make it all make sense. And I was able to figure it out. And actually I thought the way I figured it out was like, whoa, this is super cool. And I thought I was doing something magnificent. Like this is like, next level genius shit that I'm able to pull the stuff together that originally didn't tie in like that. Like it didn't, but it seems like I'm able to figure it out and it fits in perfect. And it, got all these little twists and turns. And I was thinking like, yeah, that was great. And when it was finally done, that's the most satisfying part when you see it. Cause I'll open that book and I haven't read that book in probably a year. Right. And even then I think I read it once, but most of the reading was while I'm writing.
While you're writing.
Yeah. So to sit down with the actual finished product and you're thumbing through it, I mean, I looked at it this morning and I'm like, Jesus Christ, this thing's about 430 pages. And I'm like, and I'm thumbing through it and I'm looking at every page going like, fuck, I fucking wrote this shit. It's really cool.
No, it's awesome, man.
Yeah. But when I found out later is that Vince Gilligan, the creator of Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, he often talked about how like they had to change things on the fly constantly and they didn't actually know where things were going. And I'm thinking like, wow. Like if you watched that and didn't know that, you would think that this had to be mapped out to some kind of like obscene detail because everything fits so perfectly.
Well, I was going to ask, like, do you have like some type of vision board, you see in like a murder or true crime shows with a red yarn connecting all the dots that covers an entire bedroom wall? Do you have something like that?
I think you're supposed to. I was always taught you're supposed to. Vince Gilligan didn't. And I don't know if that's just because, he's working with actors and people can't, like, there's a character, Mike Ehrmantraut. That character was never supposed to exist. I
didn't know that.
Yeah. So originally in the episode where Jesse's girlfriend Jane, she dies, and Mike Ehrmantraut comes in. He's the fixer to clean everything up.
Right.
Originally it was supposed to be Saul, but Bob Odenkirk couldn't do that episode. He had another engagement, so he's like, "Oh, we'll just create this new character." And if you look at him in that series, like, could that series even survive without him?
I don't think so.
Yeah,
No.
it's like it's wild. So I think that I was taught you should be like an outline that starts straight out, and you should beginning, middle, end, and all the twists and turns. And I think that people that do have that, but it's clear you don't need that. So yeah, I had a basic outline, and I'm just I thought I was doing something astonishing, but I'm realizing now that I'm definitely not that astonishing. This is probably pretty typical of a lot of books, TV shows, movies that are they start out one way and then they get changed and moved around on the fly, and then the finished product looks like like, wow, this must have been just meticulously outlined, and it's
right.
like, not necessarily, no. But again, I didn't really approach this book correctly. But that's part of that learning process. I learned that at USC. I learned that through writing the book, and now stuff I'm writing now is definitely a lot more coordinated, and a lot more vision is a lot clearer.
Are you your own person for floating ideas too, or do you have like people, or like a not a Facebook group, but something like an online writing group that you can be like, hey, what do you think of X?
So I am involved in a number of social media writing groups. I can't say that they're unhelpful. I don't think they're particularly helpful. And I say that because I think what you're dealing with on those sites, unfortunately, and this is online and in personal groups, I think it's vastly different, is you're dealing with other authors. So people aren't necessarily that interested in looking at what you've done and giving you feedback. They come across that way. But what they're really interested in is, here's my shit, you should buy it.
Oh,
right.
I gotcha.
Right. So that's kind of how it functions. I even made a comment once to somebody online saying, that because people would complain about how they wrote this book and they're on these groups and they're constantly putting out there and they're not getting any sales. And I commented, I said, well, this is the wrong audience. You're trying to sell the authors. Everybody here is trying to do the same thing you're doing. They're trying to sell something, not buy something. You probably would be better off joining an avid reader group, but I don't think any of these authors do that. I used it primarily to put up things like questions about titles, cover art, and things like that. I never put up samples of my work because I don't think people really are going to be reading it. I did it for some people. They gave me like 6 or 7 chapters of a book, and I would go through it and make comments. The problem with that is that's time consuming. Like, why would I read your shit and help you edit your shit? I should be doing that to my own shit, right? There's only so much time in a day. I do like helping people, but the biggest problem I had is a lot of people, I think, who fancy themselves to be writers need a lot of work. And you are reading something going like, I don't even know how I could comment or edit on this thing because it's that bad. I think a lot of people are good storytellers. They'll sit down and around a campfire and tell you a story, but
when it comes to articulating it in black and white, it's kind of like in karate, a white belt trying to fight a black belt.
Yeah. One way I would compare it is that being a stand-up comic is extremely difficult. It's a craft. It takes many years of working through material. But a lot of people are naturally funny, and they're the kind of person you're hanging out with at a bar, and they're just dropping gems left and right. They got the whole crowd just laughing. Quick comebacks. They're witty. They got funny, things going on. But take that same person and put them on a stage, suddenly, nah. Right? So that's how I would equate it to. A lot of people are great storytellers, and they've got stories to tell. And they think, well, if I'm such a great storyteller, I can just write a book real quick, right? No, it doesn't quite work that way.
No, it does not.
Yeah. So that's how I would probably equate what it's like.
So where can everybody find you?
Well, you can find me on any social media platform, Sean Kabibi, SeanCabibi, Instagram, Facebook. Well, I don't know the other ones, Twitter, not Twitter anymore, X or whatever it's called. Yeah.
Well, and technically on Instagram now you have 2.
Yeah. I am connected to the Tilted Table. I'm sure you could find me if you go there.
Well, technically you have 3.
Yeah, I just saw Sean Landon Clarke's, but I'm pretty much going to get rid of that. The other, as far as like my writing goes, I do have an author page on Facebook. And it's just Sean R. Kabibi, and you can find me there as well. There's some stuff posted on it. I don't do a whole lot of social media, which is probably part of my downside in terms of marketing. But as soon as this book comes out, I'm definitely going to probably be a little more active with it. So yeah,
you're gonna like watch your stories.
Yeah, and I mean honestly, if you look at my name, you'll fucking find me. I'm not hard to find. Like I said, I'm the only Sean Kabibi on this planet.
Well, I'm proud of you, man. This is a huge accomplishment, and the fact that like I used the word earlier, it was birthed out of your PhD, which I didn't even know you were doing.
Yeah.
So when you sprung that part on me, it was I was proud of you twice.
Yeah, that's a whole nother story. I didn't tell anybody I was doing it, and I have my reasons for it, mainly because I didn't know if I completed it or not. And I'm one of those people, I think I have enough, I don't know, pride or ego where it's like, hey, I'm getting my PhD. And then like a year or two later, like, hey, you know what's going on with that? Oh man, I dropped out. You know, I didn't want to.
Didn't work out.
It didn't work out.
Yeah. Well, man, now that you're on the Tilted Table, you're putting this out into the galaxy, and this is one of many to come. So
yeah, I thank you for the interview. Like this was kind of sprung out of nowhere, you know, like, hey, let's do an interview. And I'm like, I don't know, do people want to listen to this shit?
Yeah, man.
So yeah, thank you for bringing up the idea, and I appreciate the time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Peace.
I have an important announcement for you, so stay tuned.
Yo, that's some next level shit, bruh.
So you got me. Big deal.
The internet's answer to a question no one asked. The Tilted Table with Sean and Joe.
Folks, thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Tilted Table, the internet's answer to a question that no one asked. I am Sean Kabibi.
And I am Joey Joe, the Fracky Mac.
And you can reach us on all major social media platforms at The Tilted Table 1.
Ring the bell, notifications, hit the refresh.
That's right.
Share with your friends.
Yeah, send an email.
Yeah, all of the things.
Yeah, and buy my book, June 16th.
Coming to an Amazon near you.
Bye.